Jake Sullivan stepped off the transport ship and felt his boots hit the metal floor of the space station. The air tasted different here, clean but somehow empty, like it had been scrubbed too many times. He looked around the docking bay and saw things he had never seen before. Tall creatures covered in what looked like scales walked past him wearing thick armor that gleamed under the bright lights. Their movements were slow and careful, like they were always ready for a fight. Amy Rodriguez walked beside him carrying a simple briefcase. She was his aide and had been to stations like this before. Jake noticed she looked relaxed while everyone else seemed tense. A group of bug-like creatures skittered across the floor near them. Each one had weapons built into their arms that sparked with blue electricity. Jake wanted to stare but tried to keep walking normally. "Why does everyone look so ready for war?" Jake asked Amy quietly. Amy smiled a little. "Wait until you see the meeting hall," she said. "You will understand then." They followed signs written in dozens of languages toward the center of the station. Jake saw more strange beings as they walked. Some floated in clear bubble suits filled with water. Others moved like liquid metal, but kept their shape. All of them had one thing in common. They all carried weapons or wore armor or both. Jake looked down at his simple black suit and tie. He felt naked compared to everyone else. Amy wore her military uniform but carried no weapons. They seemed to be the only ones walking around unprotected. Voice spoke from speakers in the walls. It sounded like music mixed with computer sounds. "Human delegation, please report to Orientation Chamber 7 for security briefing." They found the chamber easily. Inside, a crystal structure grew from the floor and ceiling, meeting in the middle. Lights danced inside it as it spoke. "Welcome, Ambassador Sullivan. I am the station administrator. Before you attend your first council meeting, you must understand the security rules." Jake nodded. "Of course. What weapons am I allowed to carry?" The crystal pulsed with different colors. "Humans are not permitted to carry weapons of any kind. You may not wear armor or protective devices. You must remain completely unarmed at all times while on this station." Jake felt confused, but everyone else I saw was armed. "How am I supposed to protect myself?" "Human delegates are automatically granted safe passage and protection under special protocols," the crystal said. "This arrangement exists for the safety of all delegates." Amy squeezed Jake's shoulder gently. He could tell she knew something he did not. They were led to the main council chamber, and Jake finally understood what Amy meant. The room was enormous, with hundreds of seats arranged in circles. Each section was designed for a different species. The scaled creatures sat in metal chairs behind energy shields. The bug creatures hung from the ceiling in protective cages. The water dwellers floated in armored tanks. Right in the center sat a small section with simple wooden chairs and a basic table. No shields, no armor, no weapons anywhere in sight. A small sign read, "Human Delegation." Jake and Amy took their seats. Jake felt like he was sitting in the middle of a fortress while wearing pajamas. The meeting began with the crystal administrator explaining the current problem. A species called the Nexari had been attacking peaceful worlds. They enslaved populations and stole resources. Something had to be done about them. The scaled creature commander stood up in his armored section. "We, the Vorthek, propose immediate military action. Our battle fleets can crush the Nexari in direct combat." The bug creatures buzzed and clicked. Their speaker stood on 8 legs. "The Zephyrian Collective suggests swarm tactics. We overwhelm their defenses with numbers." The water dwellers gurgled in their tanks. "The Hydran Commerce Guild recommends economic warfare. We cut off their trade routes and starve them into surrender." Jake listened to each proposal. They all sounded like the kind of solutions their species would naturally think of. The Vorthek were obviously warriors who liked direct fights. The Zephyrians worked together like a hive mind, so they thought in terms of overwhelming numbers. The Hydrans were traders, so they thought about money and resources. When it was his turn to speak, Jake stood up slowly. He could feel hundreds of different types of eyes watching him from behind their shields and armor. "Maybe we should try talking to individual Nexari commanders," Jake said. If we can find ones who disagree with their leadership, we might be able to split them up from the inside. Sometimes the best way to stop a fight is to help your enemy fight themselves. The chamber became very quiet. Jake could hear the hum of all the energy shields and protective systems around him. He looked around at the other delegates, but could not read their expressions through their armor and protective devices. The Crystal Administrator spoke. The human proposal has been recorded. All suggestions will be considered. This session is now closed. As the other delegates began leaving in their protected groups, Jake noticed something strange. None of them looked directly at him as they passed. They all seemed to be very careful to keep their distance from the human section. "Amy," Jake said as they gathered their simple papers, "why does everyone seem afraid to get close to us? We are the only ones here without any protection at all." Amy looked around to make sure the other delegates were far enough away. "Jake, I think you have it backwards. I do not think they are afraid of us getting hurt. I think they are afraid of us hurting them." Jake stared at her. "That makes no sense. Look at us compared to them. We are completely defenseless." "Are we?" Amy asked. She picked up her briefcase and started walking toward the exit. "Come on, I think it is time you learned why humans get special treatment around here." As they left the chamber, Jake noticed the cleaning robots waited until they were completely gone before entering the human section. Even the maintenance machines seemed to avoid getting too close to where the humans had been sitting. Jake followed Amy through the corridors, passing more armed and armored aliens who all gave them a wide path. Something was very wrong with this picture, but Jake could not figure out what it was. He was starting to think that being unarmed in a place like this was not about trust or weakness. It was about something much more serious. Jake could not sleep that night. His quarters were simple compared to what he had seen of the other delegates' rooms. Through his window he could see the Vortex section with its thick metal walls and guard towers. The Zephyrian area buzzed with electric fields that made the air shimmer. Even the peaceful Hydrons lived in heavily secured water chambers. The human section looked like a normal apartment building. No guards, no shields, no security systems he could see. Yet Amy had said the other species were afraid of them. It made no sense. During breakfast, Jake decided to find answers. He approached General Krex, the Vorthak commander, at the station's central dining area. The big scaled creature was eating something that looked like raw meat behind a personal force field. "General Krex, may I ask you something?" Jake said politely, the general's yellow eyes fixed on Jake. The creature's massive hand moved slowly toward a weapon on his belt, then stopped. "Human delegate, you may speak. I am curious about the security arrangements. Why are humans the only species allowed to go unarmed?" General Krex was quiet for a long moment. His thick fingers drummed on the table. "Humans carry their weapons differently," he said finally. "I do not understand what weapons." The general stood up quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Ask your own kind, human." "I will not speak of such things." He walked away, his heavy armor clanking with each step. Jake tried the Zephyrians next. He found BuzzClick 7 in the station's technical section, working with several other Hive members on some kind of computer system. "Excuse me," Jake said. "Could I ask you about human security protocols?" All the Zephyrians stopped working. At once, their compound eyes turned toward Jake in perfect unison. The effect was unsettling. "The collective memory warns of the unshielded ones," BuzzClick 7 said in its clicking voice. "We remember the first meeting. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share." "What happened at the first meeting?" Jake asked. The Zephyrians looked at each other in a way that seemed to communicate without words. "Ask the memory keepers. We will not speak of the awakening." They turned back to their work, ignoring Jake completely. Jake felt frustrated. Everyone seemed to know something important about humans that he did not know. He was about to give up. When he remembered Amy mentioning someone named Dr. Lisa Park, he found her in the station's science section, studying alien plant samples in a laboratory. She was a small woman with brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail. Unlike everyone else on the station, she looked completely relaxed. Dr. Park, I am Jake Sullivan, the new human ambassador. She looked up from her microscope and smiled. I know who you are. I have been expecting you to find me. The other humans always come looking for answers eventually. What answers? Lisa gestured for him to sit down. Jake, how much do you know about humanity's first contact with the galactic community? Just the basic stuff from school. Captain Ben Hayes and negotiator Carol White made first contact 50 years ago. They established peaceful relations and got us a seat on the council. Lisa nodded. That is the official story. But I have been here for 2 years studying in their archives. I have found pieces of the real story. She pulled out a datapad and showed him files written in various alien languages. These are medical records from that first meeting. Several alien delegates required psychological treatment afterward. The reports mention something called the awakening and reference human capabilities that, quote, should not exist in a species claiming to be non-combatants. Jake stared at the files. What kind of capabilities? That is what I have been trying to figure out. Most of the records are classified above my clearance level, but I found fragments. Apparently, during that first meeting, there was some kind of crisis. The details are missing, but the aftermath is clear. Every species on the council agreed that humans should never be armed while on council property. Because we are too dangerous? Jake asked. No, Jake, because we are dangerous in a way they cannot understand or predict. Look at this. She showed him another file. This is from the Hydran delegate who was present 50 years ago. It says, and I am translating, the humans did not become warriors. They became something else. Something that thinks like prey, but acts like a predator that has never known fear. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What does that mean? I think it means that when humans are cornered or threatened, we do not react like other species. We do not get angry like warriors or run away like prey animals. We become something that evolution never prepared the galaxy to deal with. Lisa pulled up more files. Every species out there evolved with natural advantages. The Vorthak have armor-like skin and incredible strength. The Zephyrians have hive minds and bioelectric weapons. The Hydrans can process information faster than any computer. And humans. Humans have something none of them have. We adapt, not just physically over generations, but mentally in real time. When faced with impossible situations, humans do not just fight or flee. We find a third option that nobody else saw coming. Jake thought about his suggestion in the council meeting. While everyone else had proposed solutions based on their natural strengths, he had suggested something completely different. So they keep us unarmed because they are afraid of what we might do if we felt threatened. I think it is more than that, Lisa said. I think they keep us unarmed because they learn that humans are most dangerous when we have no advantages. When we cannot rely on weapons or armor or natural abilities, we have to rely on the one thing that scares them, which is our minds. Specifically, our ability to see solutions that do not exist until we create them. Before Jake could ask more questions, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Red lights flashed in the corridors. The station's crystal. Administrator spoke over the intercom. All delegates report to secure positions immediately. The station is under attack. Repeat, all delegates to secure positions. This is not a drill. Lisa and Jake looked at each other. Around them, alien scientists were activating personal shields and emergency protocols. But Jake noticed something else. The security systems were not just protecting the aliens from outside threats. They were also containing them, locking them into their defensive positions. Lisa, Jake said as they heard the sound of ships approaching the station. I think we are about to find out what makes humans special. Through the laboratory windows, they could see Nexari attack ships emerging from hyperspace. The enemy vessels were sleek and dangerous-looking, heading straight for the station. Jake felt something change inside him. It was subtle at first, like his mind was shifting into a different gear. The approaching danger did not make him want to hide or fight. It made him start thinking about problems and solutions. He looked around the laboratory and began to notice things he had not seen before. Emergency systems, structural weak points, potential tools, and weapons that were not really weapons. His mind was already working on plans that he had not even thought of yet. "Jake," Lisa said quietly, "your expression just changed." "Did it?" Jake asked, but he was not really listening to her anymore. He was listening to the sound of the approaching ships and calculating how much time they had before the real test began. The Nexari ships hit the station's outer shields with weapons that made the whole structure shake. Jake felt the vibrations through his feet as he and Lisa made their way toward the main corridors. Around them, the alien scientists had disappeared into protective chambers that sealed with heavy metal doors. Jake could hear the sound of energy weapons charging throughout the station. Every species was activating their defensive systems. Through the transparent walls, he could see the Vorthak, sealing themselves into armored bunkers. The Zephyrians had retreated into electric cages that crackled with defensive power. The Hydrons had withdrawn completely into their water chambers, which now glowed with protective energy fields. "Everyone is hiding," Lisa said as they walked through corridors that had been full of aliens just minutes before. Jake nodded, but he was thinking about something else. They are not just hiding from the attackers. Look at the security systems. Lisa stopped and looked around. Jake was right. The same systems that were supposed to protect the aliens were also trapping them. Each species was locked into their own defensive area, unable to move or take action against the attacking ships. The station's crystal administrator spoke over the intercom. "Primary defensive systems have failed. Nexari boarding parties are approaching Docking Bay 7. All delegates are advised to maintain secure positions until the threat has passed." Jake and Lisa reached the main council chamber. Through the large windows, they could see Nexari ships attaching themselves to the station's hull. The enemy vessels looked like metal insects, cutting through the station's outer walls with bright laser torches. "Requesting emergency authorization for defensive protocol activation," the Crystal Administrator announced. "Vorthak delegation, do you authorize military response?" General Krex's voice came through the intercom from his sealed bunker. "Negative. Vorthak forces cannot engage without risking exposure to uncontrolled combat variables." "Zephyrian Collective, do you authorize swarm response protocols?" Buzz Click 7's clicking voice responded. "Collective denies authorization. Hive integrity must be maintained, cannot risk exposure to chaos factors." "Hydron Commerce Guild, do you authorize economic warfare protocols?" The Hydron delegate's watery voice bubbled through the speakers. "Guild regulations forbid engagement without profit guarantees. Cannot risk assets in unpredictable scenario." Jake listened to each refusal with growing understanding. Every species was refusing to take action not because they were cowardly, but because their defensive systems and natural instincts required predictable, controlled situations. They could not function when faced with true chaos. The Crystal Administrator was quiet for a moment. Then it spoke again, but this time directly to Jake and Lisa. "Human delegation. You are cleared for unrestricted response under Galactic Accord Section 12. Alpha, all other delegates are advised to maintain secure positions until all clear is given." Jake felt that strange shift in his mind again, stronger this time. "Lisa, what does Section 12 Alpha mean?" "I do not know," she said, but she was looking at him strangely. "Jake, you look different. Your eyes are different." Jake did not feel different exactly. He felt focused. The approaching danger was not making him afraid or angry. It was making him think clearly about problems and solutions. He looked around the council chamber and began to see it not as a meeting room, but as a collection of tools and resources. The sound of cutting torches grew louder. The Nexari were almost through the outer hull. "We need to get to the security station," Jake said. He was not sure why he knew that, but he was certain it was the right move. They found the security center easily. It was abandoned, with all the alien security officers sealed away in their protective chambers. Jake sat down at the main control panel and began studying the displays. He had never seen this type of technology before, but somehow the interface made sense to him. "Jake, how do you know how to use that?" Lisa asked. "I do not know," Jake said, but his hands were already moving over the controls. I am just thinking about what needs to be done, and the how is following the what. On the security screens, he could see the Nexari boarding parties cutting through the final layers of hull plating. There were 12 of them, armed with energy, weapons, and wearing environmental suits. They would be inside the station in less than 5 minutes. Jake studied the station's layout on the security system. He could see where all the alien delegates were sealed away in their protective areas. He could see the approaching boarding parties, and he could see all the systems in between. The Nexari think they are boarding a defended station, Jake said quietly. They are expecting armed resistance from the species they know about. They are not expecting the station to become hostile. What do you mean? Lisa asked. Jake was already working at the control panel, routing power systems and redirecting environmental controls. Every species out there fights the way their evolution taught them. The Vorthak use strength and armor. The Zephyrians use coordinated attacks. The Hydrons use complex planning. His fingers moved over the controls faster now, reprogramming systems he had never seen before but somehow understood. But humans did not evolve any of those advantages. We evolved to solve problems with whatever we had available. The first Nexari boarding party breached the hull. Jake watched them on the security cameras as they entered the station, weapons ready, expecting to face defenders. Instead, they found empty corridors. Jake had turned off the artificial gravity in their section. The Nexari floated helplessly, trying to orient themselves in zero gravity. While they struggled, Jake re-read the atmospheric systems. The air in their corridor became thick with harmless but blinding fog from the fire suppression systems. The second boarding party entered through a different breach. Jake was ready for them too. He had superheated the metal flooring in their corridor using the station's thermal regulation systems. Their environmental suits protected them from the heat, but the sudden temperature change made their equipment malfunction. Jake, Lisa said, watching him work. How are you doing this? I'm not fighting them, Jake said, his voice calm and focused. I am just making their environment work against them. The station has everything I need. I just have to think about it differently. A third boarding party had made it deeper into the station. Jake tracked them on the security cameras, watching their movement patterns. They were professional soldiers, well-trained and disciplined. But they were trained to fight other soldiers, not to deal with an environment that had become actively hostile. Jake opened and closed doors to herd them toward the hydroponics bay. Once they were inside, he sealed the exits and activated the automated farming equipment. The mechanical harvesting arms were not weapons, but they moved fast enough and were strong enough to knock armed soldiers off their feet in the confusion. Jake filled the bay with nutritious but slippery fertilizer foam. By the time the fourth boarding party entered the station, the others were calling for help on their communication systems. Jake could hear their transmissions through the security monitors. They were reporting that the station was haunted, that the walls themselves were fighting back. This is not possible, Lisa said, watching Jake systematically neutralize boarding party after boarding party. You are defeating trained soldiers using farming equipment and air conditioning. Jake paused in his work and looked at her. For the first time since the attack began, he seemed to really see her. Lisa, I think this is what they were afraid of. Not that humans are strong or fast or naturally armed, but that when we have no advantages, we make advantages out of things that were never supposed to be advantages. The remaining Nexari boarding parties were retreating to their ships. Jake had not killed any of them, but he had made it impossible for them to complete their mission. They were covered in foam, blinded by smoke, dizzy from gravity changes, and completely demoralized by fighting an enemy they could not see or understand. As the enemy ships detached from the station and fled, Jake sat back in the security station chair. The strange focus was fading from his mind, leaving him feeling tired but oddly satisfied. Jake, Lisa said quietly, I think I understand now why they keep us unarmed. It is not that we are too dangerous with weapons. It is that we are most dangerous when we have no weapons at all. The all-clear signal echoed through the station corridors as Jake and Lisa made their way back toward the human quarters. Around them, the sound of unsealing protective chambers filled the air. Heavy metal doors opened with hydraulic hisses. Energy shields powered down with declining hums. The other species were emerging from their defensive positions like cautious animals, leaving their burrows after a storm. Jake felt different now. The sharp focus that had taken over his mind during the attack was fading, but it left behind a new understanding of himself and his place on the station. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had just turned an entire space station into a weapon against trained soldiers. They looked ordinary, but he knew now that they were not. Amy Rodriguez found them in the corridor outside the human section. She looked at Jake with an expression he had never seen before. It was respect mixed with something that might have been concern. "Jake, the station administrator wants to see you immediately," she said. "Lisa, you should come too." They followed Amy to the crystal administrator's chamber. Inside, the crystalline structure pulsed with colors Jake had not seen before. Deeper blues and purples that seemed to indicate something more serious than normal communication. "Ambassador Sullivan," the crystal said in its musical voice, "the Council requires a full report on your actions during the emergency." "Of course," Jake said. "I used the security systems to discourage the boarding parties from completing their mission. No one was seriously hurt." The crystal pulsed brighter. "You neutralized 12 trained Nexari assault teams using environmental controls and farming equipment. This level of adaptive response is beyond what most species consider possible." Jake felt uncomfortable with the way the crystal was talking about what he had done. "I just thought about the problems they were causing and found ways to solve them. Anyone could have done the same thing if they had access to the security systems." "No, Ambassador Sullivan. Anyone could not have done what you did. What you accomplished requires a type of cognitive flexibility that is extremely rare in the galaxy. You demonstrated the ability that makes humans unique among Council species." Amy stepped forward. "Jake, I think it is time you learned about the real history of human first contact." The crystal administrator seemed to agree. Colors flowed through its structure as it accessed deep archives. 50 years ago, Captain Ben Hayes and negotiator Carol White attended their first council session. During that meeting, this station was attacked by the same Nexari forces that struck today. Jake felt a chill of understanding, the same pattern. Yes, the alien delegates sealed themselves into protective positions according to their species protocols. The humans were left mobile on the station. But Captain Hayes and Carol White had no security training. They were diplomats and explorers, not soldiers. The crystal showed them holographic records of that first attack. Jake watched 2 humans who looked completely ordinary moving through the station corridors as Nexari soldiers cut through the hull. But something about their movements looked familiar. "They did the same thing I did," Jake said quietly. "Yes, but they did it without any knowledge of the station's systems. They improvised weapons from kitchen equipment. They created traps using nothing but furniture and maintenance tools. They turned the entire diplomatic quarter into a maze that the Nexari could not navigate." The holographic Carol White was shown using a broken table leg to jam a door mechanism, trapping a squad of soldiers in a conference room. Then she flooded the room with hot coffee from the diplomatic catering system until the soldiers surrendered. Captain Hayes appeared on the recording carrying what looked like a decorative plant. Jake watched in amazement as the man used the plant's root system and some electrical cables to create an improvised stunning device that could disable Nexari armor. "But the most disturbing aspect," the crystal continued, "was not what they did, but how they did it." Both humans remained completely calm throughout the engagement. They treated the life-threatening situation as simply a series of problems requiring creative solutions. Jake watched the recordings of his predecessors. They looked focused and determined, but not afraid or angry. They moved with purpose, but without the desperate energy that other species showed in combat. They looked like people solving puzzles, not fighting for their lives. Several alien delegates suffered psychological breakdowns after witnessing the human response, the crystal said. The Zephyrian collective mind was unable to process how individual beings could adapt so rapidly to changing circumstances. 3 Vorthic warriors required medical treatment for what your species might call anxiety disorders. Because we did not fight like they expected, Jake said. Because you did not fight at all in any way they could understand. Every species in the galaxy has evolved specific responses to danger. Flight, fight, freeze, or follow group protocols. Humans appear to have evolved a 4th response that we call adaptive problem solving. Amy spoke up. The Council spent years studying the recordings from that first attack. They brought in psychologists and behavioral specialists from every member species. The conclusion was unanimous. What conclusion? Jake asked. That humans become increasingly effective the more desperate their situation becomes. Every other species has limitations built into their survival instincts. When Vorthak face overwhelming odds, their warrior instincts eventually tell them to retreat with honor. When Zephyrians lose hive coordination, they become confused and ineffective. When Hydrans cannot calculate profitable outcomes, they withdraw from the situation. Jake was beginning to understand. But humans do not have those cutoff switches. Exactly. When humans face impossible situations, instead of following programmed responses, you seem to enter a state where you can see solutions that do not exist until you create them. You become most dangerous precisely when you appear most vulnerable. The Crystal Administrator added more information. This is why humans are the only species permitted to remain mobile during emergencies. Every other species requires the psychological comfort of their defensive systems to remain functional. But humans function best when stripped of conventional advantages. Lisa had been quiet during the explanation, but now she spoke up. So the reason we cannot carry weapons is not to protect other species from human violence. It is to make sure we maintain our ability to think creatively under pressure. Correct, Dr. Park. Weapons and armor provide psychological comfort, but they also limit creative thinking. A being with a weapon thinks about how to use that weapon. A being without a weapon thinks about how to create solutions from available resources. Jake thought about his experience during the attack. The moment he had realized he was defenseless, his mind had started working differently. Instead of thinking about how to fight the Nexari, he had started thinking about how to use everything around him to solve the problem they represented. So humans serve as the Council's emergency response system, Jake said. More than that, Ambassador Sullivan. Humans serve as proof that intelligence and adaptability can overcome any challenge, no matter how impossible it appears. In a galaxy full of species that have specialized themselves into evolutionary niches, humans remain the ultimate generalists. Amy pulled out a datapad and showed Jake more classified files. Every council station has human staff specifically for this reason. We are not just diplomats or scientists or traders. We are the fail-safe option when conventional solutions do not work. Jake looked at the recordings of Captain Hayes and Carol White again. They had faced the same situation he had, but 50 years earlier with none of the advantages he had enjoyed. Yet they had succeeded in the same way, using the same type of creative problem-solving that had surprised even Jake himself. There is one more thing you should know, the Crystal Administrator said. The Nexari attack today was not random. They have been testing Council defenses systematically, trying to find weaknesses they can exploit in a larger assault. And what did they learn today? Jake asked. They learned that humans are still here, and that news will spread through their command structure very quickly. The crystal pulsed with darker colors. The real test is coming soon, Ambassador Sullivan. And next time, they will come prepared for what humans can do. 3 days after the attack, Jake sat in the council chamber for an emergency session. The other delegates had returned to their protected sections, but something had changed in the way they looked at the human area. The casual dismissal he had noticed before was gone, replaced by careful attention that felt almost like supervision. The Crystal Administrator opened the session with a full report on the Nexari attack. Jake listened as it described the technical details of what had happened. But the clinical language made his actions sound like simple system management rather than the desperate improvisation he remembered. The human response prevented significant casualties and protected all council delegates, the administrator concluded. However, intelligence gathered from the captured Nexari equipment indicates this was a reconnaissance mission. They were testing our defenses for a larger assault. General Krex stood up in his armored section. The Vorthek battle fleet can be mobilized within 10 cycles. We propose immediate preemptive strikes against known Nexari staging areas. Buzz Click 7 responded from the Zephyrian Cage Network. The collective calculates 67% probability of success through coordinated swarm tactics. We recommend overwhelming their communication networks. The Hydrant delegate gurgled from inside his water tank. Economic analysis suggests targeted trade embargoes combined with resource blockades. Cut off their supply chains and they will collapse. Internally, Jake listened to the familiar pattern of each species proposing solutions that match their natural strengths. But now he understood why they always stayed within those boundaries. Their defensive systems and evolutionary programming literally prevented them from thinking outside their specialized approaches. When his turn came, Jake stood up slowly. I think we need to understand something about the Nexari before we decide how to stop them. What do you mean, human? General Krex asked. During the attack, I heard their communications. The boarding parties were professional soldiers, but they were not prepared for the kind of resistance they encountered. They expected to face conventional defenses. When the station itself started fighting back, they became confused and scared. Jake walked closer to the center of the chamber. He could feel the attention of every delegate focused on him. What if the Nexari expansion is not driven by strength but by fear? What if they attack and enslave other species because they are afraid of encountering something they cannot understand or control? The chamber was quiet. Jake could hear the hum of energy shields and protective systems all around him. Think about it, Jake continued. Every species they have attacked so far has been predictable. The Altarians were peaceful traders who surrendered when their profits were threatened. The Centauri colonists were warriors who fought bravely but conventionally. The Kepler system natives were hive-minded like the Zephyrians, but without the bioelectric defenses. Council Elder Vex of the Hydrans spoke from his tank. You are suggesting the Nexari specifically target species they can predict and control. Exactly. But humans represent something they have never encountered. We do not fit their models of how intelligent species behave under pressure. That reconnaissance attack was not just testing our defenses, it was trying to figure out what humans are. Lisa Park, who had been given a seat in the human section, added to Jake's analysis. The captured Nexari equipment includes detailed files on every council species except humans. They have complete behavioral profiles on your warrior culture. General Krex, they understand Zephyrian hive tactics perfectly, Buzz Click 7. They can predict Hydran economic responses with 90% accuracy, Elder Vex. But humans, Jake said, do not appear in their database at all. To them, we are an unknown variable in every calculation. That terrifies a species that depends on being able to predict and control their enemies. The Crystal Administrator pulsed with interested colors. Are you proposing that the human presence on the council serves as a deterrent simply through unpredictability? More than that, Jake sighed. I think the reason humans can be unarmed in these halls is because we represent something that cannot be contained or controlled by conventional means. Every other species here has weapons and armor because those tools give them confidence and predictability, but those same tools also limit their options. Jake gestured toward the protected sections around him. Look at what happened during the attack. All of your defensive systems worked perfectly. You were completely safe, but you were also completely unable to respond to the threat. Your protections became prisons. General Krex shifted uncomfortably in his armor. Vorthek battle doctrine requires predictable engagement parameters. And Zephyrian collective action needs coordinated response protocols, Buzz Click 7 added. Elder Vex gurgled agreement. Hydrogen commerce regulations forbid uncontrolled risk exposure. Exactly. Jake said, every species develops systems that maximize their natural advantages. But those same systems prevent you from adapting when faced with something completely unexpected. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Jake could see understanding dawning in the expressions of delegates who were visible through their protective gear. Amy Rodriguez stood up beside Jake. 50 years ago, the Council made a choice. They could try to make humans fit into existing defensive protocols, or they could preserve humanity's unique capabilities by keeping us outside those protocols. The choice was obvious, the Crystal Administrator said. Humans armed and armored would become simply another predictable military force. Humans unarmed and unprotected remain an adaptive wild card that no enemy can plan for or counter. Jake walked to the edge of the human section, as close as he could get to the other delegates without entering their protected areas. I understand. Now why you keep us separate? Not because you do not trust us, but because you cannot afford to let us become like you. The moment humans adopt conventional defensive thinking, Lisa added, we lose the ability to see unconventional solutions. The moment we rely on weapons and armor for protection, we stop relying on creativity and adaptation. Elder Vex spoke from his water tank. The human proposal for dealing with the Nexari through psychological warfare rather than direct confrontation. This is an example of the unpredictable thinking we require. Yes, Jake said. Instead of attacking their military forces, we should attack their need for predictability. Make them understand that the galaxy contains forces they cannot analyze or control. Once they realize they cannot predict what humans might do, their entire expansion strategy falls apart. General Krex's voice carried a note of something that might have been respect. The Nexari fear the unknown more than they fear any weapon. And humans, Buzz Click 7 clicked, represent the ultimate unknown. A species that becomes more effective when stripped of advantages. The Crystal Administrator's colors shifted to deep blues and golds. The Council recognizes that humanity's unique role in galactic security requires unprecedented protocols. The human delegation will continue to operate under special guidelines that preserve their adaptive capabilities. Jake looked around at the protected delegates, finally understanding the true nature of the arrangement. We are not your soldiers or your weapons. We are your proof that intelligence can overcome any challenge, no matter how impossible it seems. More than that, Ambassador Sullivan, the Crystal said. You are the promise that no matter how powerful or organized an enemy becomes, there will always be a species that refuses to fight on their terms. Amy pulled out a datapad showing new intelligence reports. The Nexari fleet is already withdrawing from this sector. Their reconnaissance confirmed what they feared most. The Council has access to a species that cannot be predicted, controlled, or defeated through conventional means. Jake sat back down at the simple wooden table in the center of the chamber. Around him, hundreds of species remained safely behind. Their shields and armor, each one specialized for their particular strengths. But in the center, completely exposed and vulnerable, sat the humans who had become the galaxy's insurance policy against the impossible. There is one more thing the Council should understand, Jake said quietly. The reason humans can accept this responsibility is not because we are braver or stronger than other species. It is because we learned long ago that true security does not come from building better defenses. Where does it come from? Elder Vex asked. Jake smiled, thinking about Captain Hayes and Carol White, about Lisa's research, about his own experience during the attack. True security comes from knowing that no matter what happens, no matter how hopeless the situation becomes, there is always another way forward. You just have to be willing to give up everything you think you know and trust your mind to find it. The session ended with the Council formally acknowledging humanity's unique status. As the other delegates sealed themselves back into their protective areas for transport to their ships, Jake remained in the open chamber with Amy and Lisa. So this is what we are, Jake said, looking at the empty council hall. The species that stays dangerous by staying vulnerable. The species that solves problems no one else can even see, Amy added. Lisa gathered her research materials. The species that proves intelligence and creativity are more powerful than any weapon ever created.